Poor never set out to be a potter. Born in central Kansas in 1887, he showed an early interest in the natural world and in drawing, encouraged by an artistic mother and a faculty for tools, strengthened by a manual arts high school education. As an undergraduate at Stanford University, Poor dropped economics to major in graphic art, much to the dismay of his father, and Stanford's art curricula in the early 1900s. And here's just a few images of Poor as a child and his childhood home on the plate to the right. Stanford's curricula in the early 1900s heavily favored design. Problems in pattern decoration like these seen on the right and interior design were taught alongside more traditional arts of painting, sculpting, drawing from life and landscape and figures. In letters home, only the slightest hints suggest any interest or awareness of ceramics. In one, he provided a rather vivid description of Pueblo pottery that women were selling, Native American women were selling to his stalled train on a trip home. In another, he admitted he enjoyed hanging out with the co-eds at Stanford making pottery. Upon graduation in 1910, Poor embarked on a year-long trip to Europe that started with a summer-long grand tour, mostly by bicycle, followed by a semester in London where he studied at the Slade School of Art and with Walter Sickert. This was followed by an equivalent course of study in Paris at the Académie Julienne. In London, however, Poor received his introduction to the French moderns. That fall, he visited the first post-impressionist exhibition organized by Roger Fry at the Grafton Galleries. The works of Gauguin and Van Gogh made a noted impact. Also on view were several examples of ceramics, many of these same artists, and we can see example similar, if not the same as these, by Matisse, by Maurice de Vlaminck, and by André Derain. And it's really hard to imagine that these escaped his notice. However, back in the States, Poor pursued fine art professionally, teaching at his alma mater and at what is now the San Francisco Art Institute, where he was considered the accepted leader of the younger generation of painters on the West Coast who follow the path of Cézanne. The United States engagement in World War I landed Poor in France, and with most of the fighting over within a few months, he found ample time to draw, paint, even make prints. He traveled to Nancy and had lithographs made. He had a little bit of a cottage industry going, I believe, and experienced something of the countryside and the people who lived there. He also evaluated his aims as an artist. And in the summer of 1919, Poor married for the second time and moved to New York City. He and his new wife, the textile designer Marion Dorn, soon met Mary Mowbray Clark, the co-founder of the avant-garde bookshop and gallery, the Sunwise Turn. Mowbray Clark had helped launch the 1913 Armory Show, and the part shop, part salon that she ran brought the Poors in circulation with other moderns, artists, designers, writers, and introduced them to ideas about art and decoration. A cottage amidst skyscrapers, as Clark's partner, Madge Jennison, wrote. The shop's interior took cues from Roger Fry's Omega workshops. Walls were painted a burning orange by Arthur Davies, and all colors of the palette woven up and down the windows and woodwork and floor. She called it a pot of paint flung in the face of the public. And I should say it was at an earlier location than this here at the Yale building, but you can see their sunwise turning tree there. Mowbray Clark first brought Poor and Dorn into the Hudson River Valley to her and her British sculptor husband's Rockland County country home. And this is where she was fostering an artist community. Regarded as the cultural counterpart of the village, the Colony on South Mountain Road near New City, New York, attracted a number of artists, crafters, designers, writers, poets, and composers. For the newlyweds, the rural setting with its like-minded community, low cost of living, and easy reach of the city seemed an ideal place to live and work. They soon made plans to build. The story of Poor's building his house has been often told in the popular press since it was first featured here in the International Studio, and I will only attempt to briefly account for it here. The couple bought a piece of property, an old farm with friends, and they set out to build, finding most of the material that they needed on the land, an abandoned stoneware quarry, which local builders, or actually local farmers, occasionally tapped for the builders of New York's brownstones, provided ample loose rock and poor blasted larger stones for things like the fireplace, which you can see here, and thresholds and other features. American chestnuts, which were blighted, of course, 5 years prior, stripped of their bark but still standing, provided the wonderful timbers that you see here in the framing of this French door, and also in the beam, the exposed beams here. Poor also, however, used newer materials, concrete for the low-pitched studio roof, and also a flat roof over the kitchen. And he used asbestos shingles, which made an inexpensive alternative to slate. He admitted to being inspired by the French farmhouses he visited during the war, and he also looked to the local Dutch building tradition. And you can see the high-pitched roof line here, and there's wonderful gables on the side. In fact, Poor freely borrowed from a range of aesthetic impulses: the arts and crafts movement, the colonial revival, and European modernism, which you can see more clearly in the 1931 edition. And you can see the cinder block tower rising over what was the old painting studio. And here's a view of it more closer to today, just a few years ago. And these juxtapositions that I mentioned are perhaps more stark in the interior, where you have an arts and crafts and really even a colonial revival style living room. You can see the Dutch door peeking out through the kitchen, the wonderful beam again, handmade furniture by Poor, smattering of ceramics. And another view of the living room showing this really quite extraordinary and experimental stone staircase that doesn't quite meet the floor above. And contrast this room, to the painting studio, which is very light-filled, owing to this double-height room with this wonderful studio window, metal casements now, and this rather dramatic staircase.